The first scream was not mine. It came from my 6-year-old daughter, whose small voice cracked open the polished silence of the wedding hall and made 100 guests freeze with their champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Mommy did not just get sick. Aunt Carol put something in her soup. Those words should never have belonged to a child, yet they cut through the chandelier's light and the sound of violins like a blade. I was already doubled over at the table, my stomach twisting, my breath ragged, and I felt the warm rush of blood seeping through the satin of my dress. My hands trembled as I tried to press against my body and hold myself together, but the stain kept spreading across the pale fabric. I could hear whispers sharpening into gasps as guests turned their heads. Some women clutched their pearls, others leaned closer to whisper behind manicured hands, and a few men shook their heads with grim satisfaction, as if my collapse was the entertainment they secretly expected. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. The wedding toast died on the lips of the best man. Every painted smile froze. My daughter Ella stood on her chair. Her tiny fists clenched, her eyes wide and wet. She was trembling, but her voice carried a strength that I no longer had. She pointed her finger straight at my older sister Carol, who stood near the head table looking as perfect as ever in her silver gown. The crack in Carol's expression was almost invisible, but I saw it, the twitch in her jaw, the sudden whiteness around her lips. She tried to laugh, but her voice came out too high and sharp. "She is just a child. She does not know what she is saying." Yet every eye in that room was on her and on me, and on the blood that now dripped down my legs and stained the floor beneath the white linen tablecloth. My mother, Diane, gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if she were the victim of shock, but her eyes, cold and judgmental, told me I was still the disappointment even in this moment. My father Russell stared at his shoes, refusing to look at me, his silence more cutting than any word. I could feel the walls closing and the weight of humiliation pressing down the room, turning into a courtroom where every face was a juror waiting to condemn me. And then my child's voice rose again, louder this time, steady despite her tears. I saw her. Aunt Carol poured something from a bottle into Mommy's soup. She stirred it when nobody was watching. I saw everything. The chandeliers flickered as though even the light recoiled from the truth. My knees buckled, and I wanted to sink into the floor, but Ella's small hand wrapped around mine, holding me upright with a courage far beyond her years. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Somewhere, a glass shattered against the floor, but no one moved. The wedding feast had become a scene of horror, and my sister, the flawless golden child, stood exposed under the eyes of every guest. That moment marked the end of my silence and the end of the family I thought I belonged to. Before I tell you what happened after my daughter's words, you need to understand the family I was born into, and why every gathering in our lives was never about love, but about power, control, and survival. My name is Olivia Martin, and I am 32 years old, a single mother raising my daughter Ella in a modest apartment on the east side of Nashville while working nights as a nurse to keep food on the table and the lights on. To understand why my daughter's small voice at the wedding was the only one that defended me, you must know the family that shaped me, a family obsessed with appearances, reputation, and control. My mother, Diane Martin, is 58, and to anyone outside our household, she is the picture of grace, always in tailored dresses, hair set perfectly, her smile polished for church gatherings. To me, she was the critic I could never please. The voice that told me from the time I was a child that I was not enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not obedient enough. Her judgment carved me into silence. My father, Russell Martin, is 60 tall but stooped, a man who learned long ago to disappear into the wallpaper of our home. He let Diane speak for both of them. He let her words crush me. He let her comparisons sting without offering a single defense. He was never cruel like her, but his silence was a cruelty of its own. Then there is Carol, my older sister, 35, 3 years ahead of me in school, and a lifetime ahead of me in my mother's eyes. Carol was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the daughter who was praised for her beauty, her ambition, her perfect achievements. She became a real estate broker selling million-dollar homes. She drove a gleaming white SUV. She posted endless photographs of designer clothes and exotic vacations, and every click of her camera shutter was another reminder that she lived the life I never could. I was the opposite, the shadow sister, the one who married young divorced by 30, left to raise a child while clocking in 12-hour shifts in scrubs stained with other people's blood. Every family gathering was a theater, and I was always cast as the cautionary tale. Diane would point to Carol with pride, and then glance at me with pity, sometimes with outright disgust. Carol would smirk, toss her highlighted hair, and drop small comments like crumbs meant to remind me of my failures. "You should have stayed in school. You should have chosen better. You should not be such a burden." Those words echo in my head even now. Growing up with Carol meant living in her shadow. When we were girls, she would shove me during games. She would steal my clothes. She once locked me in the attic for hours while our parents entertained guests. When I cried, Diane told me to stop being dramatic, and Russell simply turned away. The roles were clear. Carol was the crown jewel, I was the stone in the shoe. As we grew older, the violence became less physical, but no less cruel. Carol controlled every conversation. She mocked me in front of relatives. She reminded everyone that while she rose higher, I was sinking lower. My attempts to defend myself were twisted into proof of my weakness. That is how gaslighting works. They hurt you and then convince you it was your fault all along. When I married at 22, my parents pretended to be happy but whispered about my husband's unstable job. When the marriage fell apart, they said they had expected nothing else. When I found work as a nurse, they called it decent but never enough. And when I told Carol 3 months ago that I was pregnant again, her voice sliced through the phone line with contempt. "You can barely manage Ella. Who is the father this time? Do you think you can handle another mouth to feed?" I hung up, but the poison of her words lingered. Still, I wanted to believe that maybe the wedding would be different. Maybe the celebration of another life, another union, would soften the cruelty for one day. I told myself that Ella deserved to feel part of a family, even if that family saw me as a failure. So I ironed her little dress, tied her hair with a ribbon, and drove us to the ceremony, hoping for peace, even though peace had never been part of the Martin household. Looking back now, I understand that I walked into an arena disguised as a ballroom that my family was not gathering to love, but to measure, compare, and control. Every smile at the reception carried a blade hidden beneath it, and every word from Carol was a weapon designed to keep me beneath her heel. This is the family I came from, and this is why my daughter's voice at the wedding was not just brave, it was revolutionary, because she did what none of the adults ever dared to do. She spoke the truth. The wedding was held at a grand hotel in downtown Nashville, a place with marble floors that gleamed like ice chandeliers dripping with crystals and long tables draped in white cloth and roses. It was supposed to be the most beautiful day for Carol's best friend Lauren, who had chosen my sister as her maid of honor, but in truth, Carol treated the event like her own stage. From the moment Ella and I arrived, I felt the familiar weight of being watched, as if every guest was measuring my worth through the cut of my dress or the tired lines beneath my eyes. Diane greeted us with her perfumed cheek turned stiffly for a kiss, her tone sharp as she said, "Do not embarrass us tonight, Olivia. Remember that your presence here is already a courtesy." Russell stood beside her, nodding but silent as usual, clutching a glass of water like it contained all the answers he never spoke aloud. Carol swept into view moments later in a shimmering silver gown that hugged her figure perfectly. Her blonde hair arranged in soft waves, her smile so polished it could cut glass. She kissed Ella's forehead, then leaned close to me, whispering with breath sweet from champagne, "I hope you can handle behaving for just one night." She straightened and announced loudly, "Olivia is here. How wonderful." As if my arrival were a surprise to be tolerated. Laughter rippled among her circle of friends, and I felt my cheeks burn. The reception unfolded with precision, every detail curated by Carol, who took credit for choosing the linens, the flowers, even the band. Guests complimented her tirelessly, calling her impeccable, a natural leader, a shining example of the Martin name. I stayed near Ella, guiding her through introductions, reminding her to say please and thank you, hoping no one would notice the way my hands trembled when Diane looked at me. Every seat at the head table glowed with approval except mine. I was placed off to the side, close enough to be seen, far enough to be dismissed. The conversations around me hummed with talk of careers, vacations, investments, and I shrank into my chair, listening while trying not to show how small I felt. Then came the food delivered in courses by waiters gliding like shadows. Carol hovered as if orchestrating the feast herself, correcting the staff, praising the chef, basking in the admiration of the crowd. When the soup arrived, steam curling delicately from porcelain bowls, she placed one in front of me with exaggerated care. "Eat up," she said sweetly. "You need the strength," raising her brows just enough that I knew it was not kindness but mockery. I lifted the spoon, tasting the broth, and though it was rich and savory, there was a bitter edge I could not place. I glanced at Carol, who was already laughing with the groomsmen, her hand resting lightly on a man's arm, as if she owned the entire evening. Diane leaned across the table, her voice low but firm. "Do not be difficult. Olivia, eat what is served to you. Stop making faces like a child." Ella tugged on my sleeve, asking if she could have more bread, her innocent eyes watching me. I forced another spoonful, telling myself not to ruin anything, not to give them more reason to call me dramatic. The music swelled, couples drifted to the dance floor, champagne corks popped, and all around me people celebrated love and union. Yet in the pit of my stomach, unease coiled tighter. Carol circled the room like a queen surveying her court, her silver gown flashing under the lights, her laughter ringing above the music. She checked on every detail, every guest, every glass except me. Her avoidance was as loud as her presence. I felt the sweat on my palms, the heaviness in my chest, the strange aftertaste of the soup lingering. Ella sat close, flipping through the pages of the little notebook she carried everywhere, drawing dinosaurs and stars, oblivious to the storm gathering inside me. As the evening stretched, I noticed how relatives whispered behind their hands, their eyes sliding toward me. Some smirked, others shook their heads, and I knew the old narrative was circulating again. Olivia the weak one, Olivia the failed marriage, Olivia the single mother barely keeping afloat. Carol fueled it with every triumphant gesture, every word of superiority. When she raised her glass to toast Lauren, she slipped in a barb aimed at me. To women who know how to make the right choices and never settle for less. Laughter burst like fireworks, and I sank lower in my chair. I tried to distract myself by focusing on Ella, brushing her hair back from her face, telling her how beautiful she looked in her yellow dress. She smiled shyly, unaware of the daggers flying across the table. For a moment, I allowed myself the fragile hope that the night would pass without disaster, that I could endure the cruelty long enough to escape quietly. But beneath that fragile hope was dread. Something about the way Carol's eyes glimmered when she caught me watching her, something about the smirk that flickered on her lips told me she had planned more than insults. She had planned something final. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came as the band shifted into a slower melody, and couples swayed beneath the chandeliers while I tried to ignore the twisting pain beginning to coil in my stomach. At first, I told myself it was nerves, a reaction to the endless stares, the cutting remarks, the weight of being compared once again to my perfect sister. But then the cramps sharpened low and fierce like knives carving from the inside. I set down my spoon, my hand trembling, and pressed it against my abdomen, hoping no one would notice. But Carol noticed. She leaned across with that glittering smile that never reached her eyes and murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "Something does not agree with you. Olivia, maybe this is God's way of telling you to slow down." Her words slithered through me cold and poisonous, and I wondered if she knew exactly what was happening, because the bitterness of the soup returned to my mouth and the nausea rose higher. Diane glanced at me from her place of honor. Her lips pursed her eyes sharp and whispered to a friend beside her, "Always a scene with Olivia, she cannot manage a simple evening." The woman nodded, and they both turned back to the music as if my discomfort was nothing more than another flaw to tally against me. I tried to breathe evenly, tried to keep Ella entertained with little games on her notebook, but the pain tightened until sweat trickled down my back and the room blurred at the edges. I excused myself and staggered toward the restroom, clutching the wall for balance, but halfway there, another wave hit stronger, bending me double. Guests paused mid-dance, their eyes narrowing, some chuckling softly. "She cannot even handle a wedding dinner," I heard a man mutter, and shame flooded me deeper than the pain. I forced myself into the restroom, locked a stall, And there it was, the sight that ripped hope from my chest. Blood, dark and spreading, staining everything, proof that something inside me was being destroyed. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, whispering, "No, no, please, not now, not here." I am. Only 10 weeks. I already dreamed of names. I already saved small bills in an envelope for a crib. I already imagined Ella as a big sister. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed tissue against myself, but the flow did not stop. I stumbled back into the hallway, desperate for help, but the moment I re-entered the ballroom, all eyes turned and the whispers erupted. My dress was stained the red impossible to hide, and the crowd of relatives gasped as if my pain was a performance for their entertainment. Carol's voice rose above them, loud and theatrical. "Oh my God! Olivia, are you losing another one? She can barely raise the child she has." Laughter from some corners, pitying looks from others, but not a single hand reached to support me. Diane stood slowly, her face cold as marble, and declared, "This is exactly why we say some women should not reproduce, Olivia. You have proven over and over that you cannot keep a family together." Her words sliced me in half, and I wanted to scream, to beg her to stop, but my voice caught in my throat. Russell sat silent near the drinks table, eyes locked on the floor, his cowardice louder than any insult. Ella clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear, whispering, "Mommy, are you dying?" And I forced myself to straighten, though my body threatened to collapse. Carol smirked, leaning close to a cousin, whispering deliberately, loud enough for me to hear, "Nature is correcting a mistake better now than later." My blood chilled, the realization creeping in that this was not coincidence, that the bitter taste in the soup, the sharpness of her gaze, all of it connected. Yet I had no proof, only pain, only humiliation. The guests gathered like vultures, circling, commenting she never could handle responsibility. It is for the best, poor Ella. At least she will not have to share her mother's attention. Each word hammered nails into my chest. The tension in the room thickened like smoke, choking me, and I could barely remain standing. I looked at Ella, her small face fierce with determination despite her tears, and she whispered, "Mommy, I saw something. I saw what Aunt Carol did." But her voice trembled with fear. I pressed her hand, too weak to ask, too afraid to hear, and then another spasm of pain tore through me, forcing me to clutch the chair behind me. The music had stopped completely, the hall quiet except for murmurs and my ragged breathing. Carol raised her glass again, pretending to lead another toast, declaring in a ringing voice that sometimes God spares children from suffering by ending them early, a cruel sermon dressed as compassion. Guests nodded. Diane placed a hand on her heart as if she agreed, and I realized they would let me bleed here. They would let me lose everything and call it justice. The rising pain became unbearable, my vision swimming, but beneath the roar in my ears, I heard Ella's breath hitching her courage, gathering like a storm. She looked at me, then at Carol, then at the crowd, and I knew something was about to break. The night that began as a celebration was turning into a tribunal, and my daughter was preparing to deliver a verdict that none of them expected. The ballroom air grew heavier with each passing second as I tried to hold myself upright, my knees trembling, my hands gripping the edge of the table, but the sharp waves of pain tore through me until I could no longer disguise the truth of what was happening to my body. A sudden gush of blood soaked the front of my dress and dripped onto the polished floor beneath me, and a collective gasp swept through the guests. The music had long stopped, but now even the murmurs died away as 100 eyes fixed on me. The failed daughter, the single mother, the spectacle in the middle of a wedding that was never supposed to be about me. My body collapsed into the nearest chair with a sickening creak, and though I fought to stay upright, my head lolled, my breaths shallow and ragged. Ella clung to my arm, sobbing, calling my name, her small voice begging for help that none of the adults seemed willing to give. Carol moved first, stepping forward with theatrical concern, her voice pitched high so everyone could hear. "Oh no, Olivia! Another miscarriage. You really cannot keep anything together, not even your own body." Her words fell like stones into the silence, And soon whispers rose in waves. At least the poor child was spared. Maybe it is better this way. Some women are not meant for motherhood. The cruelty stung worse than the pain twisting in my belly. Diane approached slowly, flanked by her circle of church friends in pastel dresses, their faces masks of polite pity. She looked down at me at the spreading blood and shook her head with a sigh that carried more contempt than sorrow. "Some lessons are hard, Olivia," she said, her voice slicing through me. "Sometimes God shows us our limits. Focus on the daughter you already have instead of dreaming of more." I wanted to scream that I wanted this baby, that I had been careful, that I had been hopeful for the first time in years, but my throat closed with sobs and the words would not form. Russell remained at the drinks table staring into his glass as if it contained the answers, his silence louder than any judgment. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, but not one came to kneel beside me, not one offered comfort. Instead, they dissected my worth in murmurs, each whisper another knife. She should never have come. She embarrasses the family again. Carol is right. Better it ended now. Carol smiled triumphantly, her beauty gleaming under the chandeliers, and raised her glass in a mock toast. To the strength of women who know their place, who accept what life spares them from. Laughter scattered weakly through the hall, a cruel chorus that seared into my memory. Ella stood frozen beside me. Her tiny fists clenched, her tears streaking her cheeks, her wide eyes reflecting the horror of adults treating her mother's loss as entertainment. I sank lower in the chair, pressing my hands against my abdomen, feeling life slip away while my family judged me like spectators at an execution. The humiliation burned deeper with every second. Diane's friends leaned close, whispering, "At least she still has Ella, that is blessing enough." Others nodded. Uncle Dennis, red-faced from drink, muttered, "The child needs a father figure anyway. Better it happened now." Each voice stripped me of dignity, of humanity, until I felt like nothing but a cautionary tale played out for their gossip. The words merged with the pain until I could no longer tell which hurt more, my body betraying me or the cruelty of those who shared my blood. Carol leaned closer, her perfume suffocating, and whispered, "Just for me, though I knew others could hear, you never deserved this baby, Olivia, and now everyone sees it." Her smile widened as my tears streamed unchecked. The chandeliers glittered mockingly, the music had not resumed, the celebration had curdled into a public spectacle of my failure. I looked at Ella, her small body shaking with fury and fear, and something flickered in her eyes that I had never seen before, a fire of truth waiting to erupt. I wanted to tell her not to speak, to protect her from their wrath, but I was too weak, too broken, and my silence left a space that she was preparing to fill. At that moment, I realized the ballroom was no longer a wedding. It was a courtroom, and I was the accused, bleeding and shamed, while the judge and jury were my own family. The sentence was written in their whispers, the execution carried out by their indifference. The humiliation was complete. But what none of them expected was that the verdict would not come from them, it would come from the smallest voice in the room, the one they dismissed as too young to matter. Ella's lips parted as she looked at me, then at Carol, and the fury on her face made my heart pound despite the weakness in my body. The stage was set for the truth to break open, and though I had lost nearly everything, I sensed in that moment that my daughter was about to give me back the only thing that mattered. Ella's voice trembled at first, as if she was afraid the words would shatter her world, but then she stood on her chair, her small frame shaking, her eyes wide and blazing with tears and fury, and she shouted for everyone to hear. "Mommy did not do this to herself." Aunt Carol put something in her soup. The ballroom fell into a silence so deep that even the chandeliers seemed to stop glistening. Every head turned toward my daughter, every glass lowered, every whisper choked off. My little girl's words were like thunder splitting the sky, impossible to ignore. She pointed her finger directly at Carol, her hand so small yet so steady, and repeated, "I saw her." She poured something from a bottle and stirred it into Mommy's soup when no one was watching. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. Confusion spreading like fire through dry grass. Carol froze, her painted smile faltering, her glass slipping slightly in her hand. She forced a laugh, high-pitched and strained. She is just a child. Children make up stories you cannot trust what they think they saw. But Ella's voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by love and terror and a courage that no adult in that room had shown. I was getting my notebook from the table. She continued. I saw Aunt Carol look around. She opened her bag. She took out a bottle. She poured something into Mommy's bowl. Then she stirred it with a spoon and walked away fast. I saw everything. The silence cracked into chaos. Guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Carol and Ella, between me, slumped and bleeding in the chair, and the little girl who dared to speak the truth. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others covered their mouths, but none could dismiss the clarity in Ella's voice. Diane gasped again, her hand flying to her pearls, her face pale with shock, but even she could not silence what had been spoken. Russell finally raised his eyes, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Carol stepped forward, her hands fluttering, her tone rising. That is ridiculous. She is confused. Olivia must have eaten something earlier. This is not about me. Yet her eyes darted nervously, her composure cracking. Ella held her ground. Her small chin lifted, her cheeks wet with tears, but her resolve unbroken. Why did you hide the bottle in your purse? Then, she demanded, her voice ringing clear. Why did you look around first to see if anyone was watching? Gasps spread through the hall. The crowd leaned closer, tension rising, no longer a simple family drama, but something darker, something criminal. A cousin who worked as a nurse stepped forward, his face serious. Let me see the bottle. He turned toward Carol's designer handbag sitting on the gift table. Carol lunged forward, her voice shrill. Do not touch my things, that is private. But Ella stood taller on her chair and shouted, Why are you scared then? If it is only your medicine, why hide it? The chandeliers flickered as though reflecting the tremor of truth. The room tilted, my pain overwhelming. But even in my weakness, I watched with awe as my child confronted the woman who had tormented me all my life. The tension was unbearable. Some guests murmured that it could not be true, others whispered that it explained everything, and still others demanded proof. Carol's voice cracked. She is lying. She is always so quiet, so strange, she just wants attention, but her words rang hollow. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. No longer was I the scapegoat, the silent victim. My daughter had dragged the truth into the light where it could not be ignored. The faces of the guests reflected the weight of what was unfolding. Some were horrified, some ashamed, some secretly thrilled to witness scandal, but all eyes were locked on Carol and Ella. Ella climbed down from the chair and walked slowly, determined, toward Carol's handbag. No one stopped her. The crowd parted like water, watching the little girl approach with a gravity far beyond her years. She unzipped the bag, reached inside with small hands, and pulled out a brown prescription bottle. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. This is what she used. The label glinted under the light, the warning stark. Do not take if pregnant. May cause severe cramping and bleeding. Ella held it up high for everyone to see. The hall erupted in gasps, whispers turning to shouts. Carol's face drained of color. She lunged at Ella, her hands grasping, but a cousin grabbed her arms and held her back. The crowd shouted at once, some calling for calm, others demanding police. Diane staggered backward, her hand over her mouth, her perfect facade unraveling. Russell finally stepped forward, his voice shaking as he said, What have you done, Carol? My body was still racked with pain, blood seeping, vision blurring, but in that moment, I felt something shift. The truth was no longer locked inside me. My daughter had spoken, the bottle was in her hand, the lies were collapsing, and the entire family stood witness to what Carol had done. The ballroom, once filled with music and laughter, had transformed into a tribunal, and the bravest judge was a 6-year-old child who refused to be silent while her mother bled. The moment Ella lifted the brown prescription bottle high above her head, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted from disbelief to horror, and the whispers that had once ridiculed me now carried a different weight. The label was visible to those closest, and the warning was clear in bold letters that seemed to scream louder than the music ever had. A family friend, Dr. Reynolds, a retired physician who had come to celebrate the wedding, stepped forward with authority and demanded to see the bottle. Ella handed it over. her small hand shaking but steady enough to pass the evidence. Reynolds adjusted his glasses, turned the container slowly, and his face paled. "This is misoprostol," he announced, his voice grave and echoing across the hushed hall. "It is a medication used to induce miscarriages." The gasp that followed was deafening, people clutching their mouths, others dropping their glasses. Carol's composure shattered instantly. She shook her head violently, screaming, "That is mine! That is for my condition! She does not know what she is saying!" It was not in Olivia's food. Yet her protests rang desperate, her eyes darting to the exits as if considering escape. Cousin James, the nurse who had been suspicious already, stepped closer and confirmed this dose could cause severe cramping, bleeding, and loss of pregnancy. He looked at me, slumped in the chair, pale and trembling, then at Carol with disgust. "You poisoned your own sister." The hall erupted with overlapping voices, some shouting, "Call the police," others crying that it could not be true, and still others standing in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the golden child with the crime laid bare before them. Carol tried to break free, lunging at James to grab the bottle back, but strong hands from uncles and cousins restrained her. Her hair fell loose from its perfect curls. Her makeup streaked as she cried out, "You do not understand. She did not deserve another child. She fails at everything, and you all know it." Diane staggered toward her eldest daughter, confusion twisting her features, her voice trembling. "Carol, tell me you did not, please. Tell me this is a misunderstanding." But Carol's face contorted with rage and grief. "You made me this way!" she screamed. 5 years of failed IVF, 12 rounds of injections, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and nothing. I tried so hard. I was perfect. I did everything right, and still I could not give you a grandchild. And then she gets pregnant without even trying. She gets sympathy and attention while I suffer. The raw jealousy spilled out, ugly and unstoppable. The guests recoiled as if the venom in her words could burn them. My mother's hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with realization as Carol's confession filled the hall. Russell finally raised his voice after decades of silence, a thunderous roar. "You tried to kill your sister's baby out of envy. You poisoned her like she was nothing. You murdered my grandchild." The room froze as his words landed, breaking the last of Carol's facade. She sobbed and screamed. "You all thought it. You all whispered that Olivia should not have another child. I only did what you were too cowardly to say." Her eyes darted around, accusing each relative, pointing at the ones who had indeed muttered cruel words earlier in the night. The shame settled on them like a suffocating fog. Dr. Reynolds raised his hand for quiet and said firmly, "This is attempted murder and we need emergency services now." Someone had already called because the wail of sirens echoed faintly outside, growing louder. Carol thrashed against the arms holding her, shouting, "I did it for the family, to protect us from another embarrassment. I was the only one brave enough." Ella, still clutching my hand, stared at her aunt with eyes full of both fear and defiance. The smallest voice had shattered the lies, and now the full horror was undeniable. When the police entered the ballroom minutes later, their uniforms stark against the glittering decorations, the guests stepped aside in silence. Carol was read her rights as she struggled, insisting, "You cannot arrest me. I was saving us all. You do not know what it is like to be perfect all the time." The officers did not falter. They took the bottle from Reynolds, secured Carol in handcuffs, and led her toward the exit. She turned her head once, her face wild, her voice a hoarse cry. "I deserved that baby. Not you. Never. You." The doors closed behind her, the sound echoing like a final verdict. I sat trembling, half-conscious, but I saw everything. I saw Diane collapse into a chair, her mask broken, whispering over and over, "I raised a monster." I saw Russell kneel beside me for the first time in my life, his hands steady as he tried to keep me from slipping further. I saw relatives avert their eyes, ashamed of the words they had spoken earlier when they thought my suffering was entertainment. And I saw Ella, my small, brave girl, standing taller than any adult in the room, her truth stronger than all of their silence. The wedding hall that had begun the evening as a place of celebration had turned into a chamber of reckoning, and the reckoning was not finished yet. The flashing red and blue lights outside the hotel windows painted the marble walls in colors of alarm as the police escorted Carol into the night, her silver gown torn, her hair undone, her cries echoing that she had done it for the family. The wedding guests stood frozen in stunned clusters, their whispers now subdued, no longer mocking me, but carrying guilt and disbelief. I was lifted gently by paramedics, my body-weak blood soaking the stretcher as Ella clung to my hand and begged them not to let me die. My last vision before the ambulance doors closed was of Diane standing motionless in the ballroom, her church friends edging away from her as if her shame were contagious, and Russell staring after me with tears in his eyes, words unspoken for decades finally rising in his throat. At the hospital, the truth was confirmed. The tests showed the presence of misoprostol in my system, the cause of the violent miscarriage that had ripped away the fragile hope I had carried. The doctor told me bluntly that the dose had been high enough to threaten my own life as well, and if Ella had not spoken when she did, and if help had arrived even 10 minutes later, I might not have survived. I lay in the sterile room under harsh fluorescent lights, grief clawing at me while tubes delivered blood and fluids to keep me alive. I wept for the child I would never hold for the nursery. I would never decorate for the names I had whispered in the dark. News of the arrest spread quickly. Within hours, Carol's perfect image as the golden child of the Martin family crumbled. Her real estate agency terminated her employment the very next morning, citing reputational damage. Her husband, humiliated and furious, filed for divorce before the trial even began. Reporters camped outside the courthouse as the charges were read, attempted murder poisoning assault with a deadly weapon. Her face, once celebrated on glossy brochures, was now plastered across the news as a criminal. The same relatives who had once praised her now avoided her name, pretending they had not laughed at her jokes, pretending they had not nodded when she mocked me. Their cowardice was as sharp as their earlier cruelty. For Diane, the fall was devastating. She visited me at the hospital after 2 days, her posture stiff, her hands shaking. She stood in the doorway for a long time before speaking, her voice low. "I created this. I compared you two until Carol believed she had to be perfect, and you had to be nothing. I am the one who should be blamed." But I was too weak to argue, too broken to comfort her, and I turned my face away. Russell came next for the first time in my life, kneeling beside my bed, taking my hand, whispering through tears, "I have been proud of you always. I was only too afraid of Diane to say it." His voice cracked. "I let my silence hurt you. I failed you. I failed as a father." For a moment, I saw the man he might have been if he had spoken sooner, but decades of silence cannot be erased with a few words. The family fractured in the weeks that followed. Some relatives cut contact, entirely ashamed of their words, the night of the wedding, too cowardly to face the truth of what they had done. Others sent letters of apology filled with excuses and claims that they had not meant the things they said. Uncle Dennis turned his guilt into fury at Carol, shouting at anyone who would listen that she alone had poisoned me, as if his own mocking words had not been part of the cruelty. Aunt Patricia vanished from gatherings, unwilling to be reminded of the nod she had given when Carol declared that I was unfit for motherhood. The Martin family, once obsessed with its image of perfection, now lay in ruins, its fractures too deep to mend. Carol's trial came quickly. Ella's testimony was steady and clear, her small voice recounting every detail of what she had seen that night. The jury listened in silence as the evidence was presented, the prescription records showing Carol had lied to obtain the medication, the text messages recovered from her phone, where she told a friend she would fix the Olivia problem once and for all, the bottle itself taken from her bag in front of 100 witnesses. The verdict was guilty. She was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, her pleas for mercy drowned out by the memory of my blood on the ballroom floor. I did not attend the sentencing, but I read the transcript. Carol never expressed remorse. She only repeated that she deserved a baby, not me. The consequences rippled outward. Diane withdrew from her church circle, no longer the shining matriarch, but a woman whispered about with pity. Russell began therapy with me, and Ella determined to find his voice before it was too late. My grandparents, horrified by the betrayal, changed their will to ensure every cent went to Ella's education and none to Carol. Even some of Diane's friends reached out with trembling apologies, admitting they had joined in the cruelty that night, admitting they had stood silent when a child had to speak. It was too late to undo the loss, but their shame at least was acknowledgement. As for me, I carried scars deeper than my body could show. The grief of losing my child lived in every quiet moment, but so did the fierce pride for Ella, who had stood tall when every adult around us failed. We held a small memorial service 6 months later, just 20 people, those who had proven themselves by their actions. Ella read a poem she wrote for the sibling she would never meet, her words simple but powerful. I love you, even if I never saw you. I will keep you in my heart forever. We planted a cherry tree in our backyard, a symbol of life born from loss, a promise that beauty could grow even from poisoned soil. The aftermath was not healing overnight, but it was justice. Carol had lost her freedom, her career, her reputation. The relatives who had once mocked me now avoided my eyes. Diane admitted her failures, Russell tried to rebuild, and Ella remained my anchor. The wedding that had begun as another chance to humiliate me ended instead as the day the truth was shouted by a child and the lies of generations collapsed in front of everyone. In the months that followed, the wedding turned crime scene life did not return to what it had been before, but it shifted into something clearer, stripped of illusions. I learned that family is not blood or name. It is not tradition or ceremony. It is not the opinion of a mother who measures worth in reputation, or a sister who claws at you out of jealousy. Family is the hand that holds yours when you are bleeding and humiliated, the small voice that refuses to stay silent while others look away. The person who chooses truth when lies are easier. For me, family became Ella the 6-year-old who changed everything with her courage. Our days were quiet, but filled with a new strength. She began middle school still shy, but no longer afraid to speak up. When asked by her teacher why she wanted to be a detective when she grew up, she said softly but firmly, "Because I am good at seeing what people try to hide." Her words made me proud and broke my heart at the same time, because children should not have to carry such heavy lessons so young. But she had earned the wisdom through fire. The cherry tree in our backyard bloomed that spring, fragile blossoms opening against the sky, each petal a reminder of the life lost and the truth revealed. We visited it often, sitting beneath its branches, telling stories of the sibling Ella never met, remembering the hope I once carried. She asked me one day, "Do you think the baby knows I tried to save them?" And I told her, "Yes, I believe they know you are the bravest person in our family and that they are proud of you." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled, resting her head against my arm. That moment, simple and quiet, held more healing than any apology from the relatives who had failed me. The wider family remained fractured. Some never spoke to us again, unwilling to face the mirror of their own cruelty. Others sent letters that I read once, and then burned, unwilling to carry their excuses. Diane attended therapy with us for a time, confessing through sobs that she had raised Carol into a weapon by setting her on a pedestal and crushing me with comparison. She said more than once, "I am the one who should be in prison. I created this environment. I gave her permission by my words." I did not forgive her quickly, and maybe I never will fully, but I saw in her a woman stripped of her mask, broken, and desperate to repair what she had shattered. Russell continued his slow transformation, speaking more openly, telling me he loved me, telling Ella that she was strong and wise, trying to make up for years of silence. It was late, but it was something. Carol's letters came from prison, 17 of them, each one begging for forgiveness, each one claiming she had been sick with grief and pressure. I returned them all unopened. Forgiveness is not owed to someone who murdered your child out of envy. Some bonds cannot be repaired, some betrayals cut too deep. When asked by relatives if I would ever visit her, I said simply, no. My daughter and I survived because she was willing to speak when everyone else was silent. That truth is the only loyalty that matters now. We built new traditions, small and private. No more reunions in ballrooms or on family farms, no more gatherings designed to measure and compare. Instead, we invited a handful of people into our apartment, those who had stood by us, cousins who believed Ella friends who rushed to the hospital. We cooked simple meals, we laughed without judgment. We celebrated truth rather than perfection. It was not grand, but it was real, and that was enough. Every year on the anniversary of the loss, we gathered under the cherry tree, Just Ella and me, sometimes joined by Russell when he was brave enough. We lit a candle, we read a poem, we let the petals fall into our hands like blessings. It was our way of turning tragedy into remembrance, pain into resilience. When people asked about Carol, Ella answered in words that silenced any further questions. She is not our family anymore. Family does not poison each other. Family speaks up when someone is being hurt. Hearing her say those words with such clarity made me realize that while I had lost one child, I had gained a daughter whose spirit was unbreakable, who understood more about loyalty and truth than most adults ever would. The closure did not come all at once, but in fragments, in small victories, in quiet nights, where I no longer cried myself to sleep, in mornings where Ella's laughter filled the kitchen, in the strength that grew between us. Reflection came in waves too, teaching me that survival is not just about enduring pain, but about finding the voice to confront it, even if that voice belongs to a child. If there is one lesson I carry, it is that silence is dangerous. My father's silence, my mother's silence, my relatives' silence, all of it created the space for Carol's crime. But Ella refused to be silent, and that refusal saved my life. She showed me that truth can bloom even in poisoned soil, that courage can come from the smallest hands. The wedding that began as another stage for humiliation became the moment everything changed. It destroyed illusions, tore away facades, and left behind something raw but honest. And though I would never willingly trade my child for truth, the truth we gained is what allows me to live now to teach Ella that she is not invisible, that her voice matters. As I sit beneath the cherry blossoms each spring, I whisper to the child I lost and to the one I still hold. We are not defined by the cruelty of others. We are defined by the courage to stand against it, and in that courage we have finally found what family truly means.